And I mean, I can think as long as I've been in education, the days that I feel really good about the impact that I had were the days that I was proactive.
Mm.
And the days that maybe sometimes I'm like, man, was I effective as I need to be? Those are the days that I'm reactive.
Welcome to School and Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds, featuring prominent leaders, subject matter experts, and thought innovators with their perspectives on the current challenges facing K-12 education. I'm your host, Larissa Napolitan, a former teacher, instructional coach, and a member of the Branching Minds team, here to lead conversations with educational leaders and experts and to shine a light on phenomenal educators and those that are on a mission to transform our schools and the lives of students. If you didn't know, Branching Minds provides a ton of great resources for implementing MTSS, like our newsletter and our upcoming live virtual mini summit in June. Check out our show notes for links to sign up for both. Many school leaders move into their positions with the hopes of making a greater impact beyond one classroom. However, the role often comes with so many other responsibilities that are related to more of the managing of the day to day of a building and not so much that instruction aspect of school. And so today I am excited to dive into this topic with my guest, Joel Addis, an elementary school principal from Derby, Kansas. And Joel and I often talk about the all things education, usually over breakfast on Christmas morning at our family gatherings, as he is married to one of my sisters. But so I'm excited to officially talk about this, that we're recording it and it's official. So welcome, Joel, to the podcast.
Thanks, Larissa. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How
Good.
are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks.
It is May, so I know
Yes.
it's crunch time in an elementary school with all the activities. So thank you for giving us a little bit of time
No, I'm
today.
happy to do it. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for the offer.
You're welcome. Well, I would love for you to just begin, kind of share a little bit about your background because
Okay.
you have kind of a wide range of experience. And so I'd love for audience to hear a little bit about your background.
So I started working for Derby Public Schools in February of 2002. I had kind of not been super successful the first time I went to college. And my mom is an educator, and she suggested that I get a job at the district. And so I started working in a middle school classroom for students with intellectual disabilities. I was a para educator there. Really quickly fell in love with working with students and having that positive impact. And so I went back to school. And I kept that job until 2005. And during that time, I worked summers as a substitute custodian in the district. And then in 2005, I started subbing when I started going to school at Wichita State. And I subbed throughout Derby Public Schools from 2005 to 2007. And I was hired as an elementary special education teacher, so high incidence special education teacher. I worked at three buildings across 15 years in that role. During that time, I also spent some time working before and after school in summer care. I was an extended school year service provider, so working with my students and others during that setting during the summer. And then I was really involved in our local teachers association. And so um, my leadership journey really happened kind of in small incremental steps. And really, for my last 2 years before I became a principal, I served as president of our local association. So that really contributed to my experiences as well. Um, I had a year in between teaching and in between when I started working as a principal. And during that time, I worked in the district office as our coordinator for our COVID testing for a year. And so that was in the 2021 2022 school year. And then I'm in my second year as principal here at Swaney. So
Well, and I'm sure that that time at the district office gave you a different perspective, even coming back into elementary school.
it
And
did.
so I'm sure that contributes to your leadership decisions now.
It really does. And it's interesting because, when I say that I did that, people are like, ugh. And really, like, was it a stressful job? Yes. But, when I think about the experiences I had as a teacher, especially a special education teacher, providing support to teachers for instructional or behavioral needs, collaborating with and leading a team of paraeducators, supporting students in the classroom and both in a smaller setting. It really developed one specific set of skills that I needed to be a successful principal. The one piece that I didn't have in place was, as a teacher, you do always have kind of that safety net. If you've got an upset parent, work to handle it yourself, but then always have an administrator there to help. Well, when I was COVID coordinator, I mean, I was leading a department and very much was that person for that team. And so, in terms of dealing with parents really who are in heightened emotional states, you know, that really helped fill that gap for me.
That's I'm sure. Yeah, I was gonna say that definitely, you got trial by fire maybe a little bit in that that
Just a bit.
role. Okay, well, before we dive in, I always like to ask kind of a fun question so
Okay.
to kind of help our audience get to know maybe your little sense of humor or just your story a little bit. The question today I wanna ask is, like, as a kid, what is a misconception you had about being an adult?
Well, I think probably the main misconception is that I keep my hair. I mean, I was all because I mean, at one point I did have hair and it was nice, but it was like, man, I always expected that I'd be an adult with a full head of hair, and that's not really been my journey. So, if I could go back and say anything to my childhood self is like, sorry, bud, it's not going to happen. But
Appreciate
that
it
it's
now, you
okay.
know?
Yeah, exactly. Get ready for 18 because that's when it's starting.
Well, I'm sure you're not alone. I think there's probably many people that have that encounter of whether it's hair or physical ability or sight or
Yeah.
whatever it is. So, well, okay, the reason I wanted to talk to you is because you at one point we were discussing this at Christmas, I think it was, and or discussing education and you were sharing about some of the things that you were doing as an elementary school principal and I was like, this is kind of amazing. I want to talk about this on the podcast. And so even though you have been a longtime educator,
Hmm.
and you more recently stepped into the role of a school leader, I imagine there's many that are like you that are new to the position. How is this role maybe different than you expected it to be? Kind of relating to my question, my fun question about as a kid, but how is this different than you thought it would be?
I think it's until you're doing this job, I think it's hard to understand how easy it is to just quickly be overwhelmed. And it's really those operational things. There are things that I anticipate and I know that are going to happen on any given day. Meetings, things that pull me outside of the building. But then there are also those unexpected things that pop up. It's fire marshal visit. Well, there's an hour of my day, or it's a student behavior. And, sometimes I've got people who are available to help assist with that. Sometimes there are staff members who, they're just not available because they're working with students or they're out. Someone calls in sick and so or has to leave early unexpectedly. And so what do those things look like? So I think that would be that one thing that I wasn't really ready.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's the often is like the urgent things kind of overcrowd your day often. And
Yeah.
I mean, I encounter that a lot as an instructional coach where,
Mhm.
I'd have someone, I'd think my day starting one way, and then I'd have someone standing at my door when I walk in
Mhm. Yeah.
and have to immediately address a technology issue or something. And so it's never boring, I
No,
think is a
never. Never. Keeps me on my
so
toes.
yeah. So, knowing that the job is really busy and there's like a lot of urgent needs, can you kind of share about how you've kept that the supporting instruction or the most important aspects of your job as a top priority?
Sure. So I think it's important to start kind of just with that research foundation that there's a high correlation between principals who are instructionally focused and spend most of their day on those activities and student achievement. And so, with this, as I moved into this role, I knew that I wanted that to be a top priority. And it's nice. There's a program. It's part of the National SAM innovation process, and it's a time track program. And SAM stands for School Administrator Management. And so that's a tool that I utilize really on an ongoing basis throughout the day. And it allows me to track really just even if I want to down to the minute how I'm spending my time. and what I am focused on, and even what categories or what tasks I'm doing. So, originally I was thinking, well, I've got a Google Calendar and I'm pretty well versed in utilizing that tool. And so it's okay, I can have just a principal Google Calendar, and that way I can just keep track. Okay, this is what I'm going to do now. This is what I'm going to do, in an hour. But, this piece allows me to go in and say, okay, I'm doing walkthroughs. I have an hour blocked out for walkthroughs. Um, these are the teachers that I went and to their classrooms during that walkthrough period. Um, these are the notes on what I saw during that time. And so then I can go in and actually track, who I'm spending time with, what I was doing when I was spending that time with that person, and then tie it back into any feedback that I want to give.
So tracking the tool that you use, it's just more than a Google Calendar because
Hmm.
you put a lot of that information in there. And then do you get to like have reports and or anything like
Yeah.
that you get out of that
Hmm.
tool?
Yeah. So part of this is actually I collaborate daily with my instructional coach, and we have 30 minutes set aside to meet. And during that time, we go through what my schedule is for the current day, what happened in the previous day that adjusted my schedule. Then we can also go in and look at data. And the data is that I get is pretty incredible. It allows me to go in and look at indicators, so I know that I spent this much of my time, this week, this month on walkthroughs. Then I can go in and see, okay, this is how much time I spent with a certain teacher, on a walkthrough or working with a student, planning curriculum and assessment, professional development. And I can look at that both in terms of time spent and the number of interactions I've had with each educator. And so really that ongoing data, but also the reflection that it kind of prompts really is what has impacted me as an administrator. It's really what helps me dive in and say, okay, this is where I need to be. This is what I need to be doing. And this is how I'm effective on a daily basis.
Yeah, well, it makes me think about as an instructional coach, once a quarter we had to kind of track our time for a
Hmm.
week and see like how we were using it, and like spring semester or like quarter four, I was kind of the assessment person at my school. And so majority of my time was spent like on data management or things like that. But it was important. We would sit down and look at the data together and see how are we spending our
Yeah,
time. And and it always caused me to think of like, "Oh, am I not, being intentional with my time to plan and say if I'm gonna do walkthroughs or am I gonna spend time in the classroom?" Because I think that like all the other things could crowd in on my time really easily. Like
exactly.
I could spend a majority of my day answering emails or, creating resources, but, if I don't actually plan to take the time, it won't ever have happen, and I always think that with a leader, it's like you could probably answer parent emails or deal with situations all day long, but like planning to be in classrooms, has it takes a little more effort to get there a little bit. Is that am I correct in saying that?
You are. And actually, I had a similar experience last year. So, end of the first year as a principal, looking, getting the list of things ready for the summer. I have a whiteboard in my office. It's currently packed with things that I'm just kind of, that's my thought process on it. But really, last year was even more of that. And so it was interesting. The last week of school, I got some feedback from one of my teachers, and she was like, not really seen you much this month, right? And then it allows me to go back in and say, okay, let's actually go back and really look at that. And yeah, was I instructionally focused? Yes. But a lot of that was office work time, during that last month of the year. And so when I was meeting with my instructional coach at the beginning of the year and setting my targets for the year, I intentionally went in and put walkthroughs as one of them, because it was like, okay, it's that wanting to be ongoing and present in the classroom. And then we track that. And so, like during the month of April, I had 186 walkthroughs, and they weren't always, like I'm giving feedback. Sometimes I was just in a classroom, for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. But during that window, if I see something that I want to provide celebration or direct feedback on, it's still there and I can provide that. So, yeah, it
Yeah.
is that taking the feedback, comparing it then to the data, and then adjusting as I move forward.
We're talking about instructional time. I kind of want to define that because I
Okay,
think that can mean a lot of different
sure.
things for people. Is that just being in the classroom? So maybe kind of unpack that and tell me a little bit more.
Of course. So, really, when you think about the duties of an administrator, they can be categorized kind of into two different sections, right? So, there's management activities and instructional activities. And really, when you're looking, like the management activities are things that are important to do, but they don't necessarily have an instructional purpose. So, like, if let's take I mean, I'll unpack a little broader, but if you take a look at like a student having a behavior. So, there are different layers of that, right? So if I'm there's student discipline, which typically is a management activity, um, working with that student through their behavior, which is an instructional activity because you're focused on helping develop those skills. Or, then paperwork, which is almost always management, and then, parents and guardians time, which can be management, and usually in that situation it is. So, broadly looking at it, management time is going to not necessarily have a direct correlation to instruction or student achievement that's happening in the classroom. Instructional time does, but it's not just being present in the classroom. It's also, you know, making plans, so planning curriculum and assessment. What are we going to be putting into place? It can be meetings at the district office. So, when I go and meet with my team of administrators and district leadership, a lot of the times we are talking about things that have that instructional focus. At times, if I'm meeting with my building leadership team, or if I'm meeting with an academic committee or state assessment planning group, that is decision making groups and committees, which is something that's does have an impact on instruction. And then, of course, you do have those, walkthroughs, observations, working with students. And it helps me because I really try and fold in those different indicators to the different activities I'm doing. So earlier this week, we were short in the lunchroom. And so I was present, I think it was Monday, and just monitoring, reminding students of expectations. But as I was doing that, going in and just saying, hey, what's something you learned this week that really excited you? What's something you feel like you need some additional help on? So it's kind of having those conversations with students that are instructionally focused. And so, and I don't just do it for the time tracker, but then you can go in and say, okay, so I was with students for 2 hours in the lunchroom. And I would estimate that 70% of the time was student supervision, which is management. And then 30% of the time I was working with students. And so it's, setting expectations, talking about learning. And so it really just helps kind of break things up like that. Does that kind of answer?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that actually, well, it makes me think about the idea of probably even thinking about your time. Like, you could think about supervision in the cafeteria
Hmm.
as directly a management. You're just managing behavior. Like, you could really just think about it like that. But maybe even time this process as maybe you think about that time differently. Some of it is that instruction time when you are directly interacting with students, asking them about what they're learning, even helping them build skills of how to be a part of the school community during lunchtime and some of those things. And so I think this kind of process can help break down some of those time. I don't know. I just feel like in my mind, I think we want to make it really black and white, and I also think that in education often, or even people outside of education, want to make things very black and white of what school leaders, what educators do, because there is a part of your job that is administrative and management, but there is so much of what you do also that influences instruction, and sort of your presence. It's almost like saying, like, there's quantity time and there's
Hmm.
quality time.
Exactly.
So it's like, how much of this is just time of you being a body in the room versus you actually doing the work of an educator.
And that kind of ties back to that intentionality piece, right? Because I really think that that's if I had to just pick one word, which is hard for me to pull away from this, it's intentionality, and it's internalizing the idea of what is management versus instructional time. Because let's go back to that lunchroom example. The easiest thing for me to do during that 2 hour block of time would be to just kind of be present. You're monitoring behaviors, using the microphone, setting expectations, reminding of behaviors, observing, and kind of going through that loop. But utilizing this tracker and following this process has really internalized in me, okay, this is a time when I can take advantage of the time that I'm present with students to have an instructional focus. And then really
Mm.
expanding that as well. How am I using time with my staff members to make sure that I'm present and having that instructional focus? So, and we've kind of incorporated that in every meeting that we have, if it's a PLC or an in-service time or a committee meeting, we always start by going over our norms as a building, and then we divide our meeting up into three sections. First, we always go over celebrations, and then we talk about things that are teaching and learning, so instructionally focused, and then nuts and bolts, which are typically management.
Wow. I mean, we talk a lot about here at Branchy Minds, helping people, have really productive and efficient meetings and really making sure that we're making the most of our time. Because I think that, I mean, time is the biggest commodity of, I mean, I always say that time is the currency of education. Like, it's the
Definitely.
thing we never have enough of. And, I think there is that part of like figuring out how to, not as like, let's not optimize every part of the day of an educator, but let's make the most of what we have, which I guess is the definition of optimize.
Yeah.
But but I think I say that in like not the trite way of saying let's optimize our day, but more of we have this time, how can we take advantage of it and being intentional with it? And I think that for many educators and maybe even for some leaders, the last 4 years has a little bit been a survival of like, we just have to kind of go through the motions and try to like do the best we can with what we have. But now I think that idea of really being intentional and with our time can be really powerful for educators because we have it's so limited. And I think there is that part of like we're being asked to do a lot of things. Like here's one more thing to do, one more thing to do, but really thinking about like what is the most important? What is the thing that's going to make the most impact? How can we spend our time in that way? And it takes a lot of intentionality to really think through that. So I like that word intention.
Well, I mean, it's the difference between being reactive and proactive. And I mean, I can think as long as I've been in education, the days that I feel really good about the impact that I had were the days that I was proactive. and
Mm.
and the days that maybe sometimes I'm like, man, was I effective as I need to be? Those are the days that I'm reactive. And that kind of ties back to that piece that we talked about early on, or early in our conversation, was about that, feeling of overwhelmedness that can come with this position. And so that's, it kind of goes back to that intentional usage of my time. If I'm intentional about where I'm at, are there still going to be times where I have to react and be reactive? Yeah, but it helps me maximize the rest of my time into a proactive way where I'm intentional on what I'm focused on and really who I'm also spending my time with.
Well, and I always think that if you're proactive, you're able to adapt or be responsive. I like to use the word responsive rather
Sure.
than reactive
Yeah.
because I think you're able to respond in a way that maybe you've already thought about before or you've already planned for because you're being proactive. It's a lot of talking to, like when we talk about standard treatment protocol for different things, it's like we've already thought through how we might respond to a situation like this. And so it's not like we're not laying the tracks before the train. And there are so many years of my education career that like it really felt like no one knows what they're doing and we're
Yeah.
just like the train's coming and we're just laying down tracks as quickly as possible. And so I do think that that is something to consider in education. I think, we talk about a lot of big ideas around education, but I think that idea of like, how can we be proactive in planning for, um, planning with intention to make the most of our time. And I think that that's, this idea of time tracking, even I think what you're talking really about is that it's changed your mindset around your
Exactly.
time.
Yeah, it has. And I mean, coming from special education, like I lean heavily into structures and processes, and that really ties into that piece of planning ahead, right? Because if we, student behavior, if we have met and we know kind of what that student's wave is going to look like, and we have a detailed structure in place to respond to that, then it does two things. One, it allows us to be purposeful and hopefully help minimize what that wave looks like. But then the other thing is it technically doesn't matter who responds. I mean, a student is always going to have a preference about who they want to be with and who they want to respond. But if you're utilizing a consistent structure and system, that then the response plan is based on a system and not a person. And there were a few
Mm,
years when I was teaching where the the effectiveness, like I was the plan, right? So I had some kids, they were with me most of the day, they had some significant needs, including behavioral, and anytime I was out of the room or there was a sub, I knew what I was going to come back to the next day. I knew what I was going to be doing every day, because the the piece was reliant on me, like that
yeah,
encouragement to work. And so by utilizing structures, we actually utilize first responder lists as part of this process for different things in the building. And so, like, if there's a transportation concern, it doesn't automatically come to me. If there's a concern in the office, it'll go to my administrative assistant first. But part of that is for behavior, and we have a first responder list. So if there is an issue with a behavior in the building, am I on call? Yes. And if it gets to a certain level, does it need to be me? Yes. But there are other layers that we can go to, and that's where having that consistent structure in place really helps with that.
man, that that's a little mind blowing for me because I think about there are so many schools that operate out of, that one person who's really great with that student, right? Or that one person you call when you're dealing with behavior, or, it's the school counselor or the social worker that, has that relationship with the student, which those are really powerful. But I think the weight that that puts on an educator of I'm the thing that is their success is dependent on me. And I think that having a structure and having kind of like a protocol, here are the three people that you can call, or like here's the structure, here's what we do in this type of situation, helps take that pressure off of, an educator to feel like they're solely responsible for what happens. And I also think it's kind of turnover proof too, a little bit, in the way that, we talk a lot about, when you develop a system like MTSS or anything in a school, like an initiative, and it's only if that one person is the expert and that one person is the one that's running everything. If they leave, then that system falls apart, where it's like you have to build the system and structure that's a part of the culture and the norm of the school, that's not about one person.
And that really ties into you're right. I mean, it ties into the concept of distributive leadership, right? Because it eases the burden on the team, but it also eases the burden on the administrator. And that's something that I always struggle with, because it's just kind of in my nature. Like I want, my shoulders are broad, my yoke can be mighty. And I want to be that person who can take those things. And so you talk about a mind shift or a mindset shift, and that also has been a shift for me, in that,
Mm,
okay, so I'm the leader, but part of that is engaging in distributive leadership. I don't have to have my hands on every single thing that happens in the building. If I need to be made aware of something, teachers and staff will make me aware of it, and then it's trusting my team and
mm.
trusting staff to step in and fill those roles. Because honestly, like, I talk about being overwhelmed at times, and that can be part of this. But there is a direct correlation when I'm really leaning into the capabilities of my team across the building. Yeah, I'm not going to be as inclined to feel that way.
Well, I would love to hear a little bit about, after doing this process,
Mhm.
how's that impacted, maybe, like, you were talking a lot about your work, but how's that impacted your culture and even your teachers? How have you felt like maybe a difference when you started the process to now of your relationship with teachers? Like, I would just love to hear more about what that's meant for them.
So I think it's that presence piece, right? And I think that's the biggest thing that I can do for my staff to have a positive impact on school culture. It's being present with my staff on a daily basis, and also my students. And so if it's knowing that, okay, this is the time where, my schedule says that I'm going to be greeting students at the door, or I'm going to be present with parents during dismissal, or I'm going to go to this hall during this time, and this is what I'm going to be doing. If I'm going to touch base and work with a student during that time, if I'm going to just do a walkthrough, if I'm going to be there for longer observations. So I feel like that's the biggest thing that I can do to have a positive impact. Because as a leader, I mean, we worked my first year here to set our vision and our mission and establish our norms, which are important pieces to our culture. Because again, that's a system and a structure that carries throughout the building, no matter who is involved in a situation. But being present in the building helps my staff know that I'm supporting them. It helps my students know that I'm invested in their learning. It also makes it less awkward when I'm in from a more formal reason. So, like if I'm doing an observation as part of an evaluation, it's not like, why is Mr. Addis here? Because they're used to seeing me. The teacher, hopefully, it helps them feel at ease because they're used to me being present.
Yeah, well, we all know that those evaluation kids act different when the
Yes.
principals come in, or like I've had I think my first couple of years, I like prepped my students for the day I was observed because I was
Hmm.
like, this is really important for me, like I
Yeah.
kind of like gave them the pep talk of
Hmm.
like, you know, do a great job. Well, okay, my last question is, what's something that you wish you could go back and tell your past self, like, before you started this role as a school leader? What would you tell yourself?
I think I would tell myself that I should have started earlier. I mean, it was interesting because when I was doing my work for my endorsement, it's like, I've been in education for 3 years. I've been in education for 5 years. I've been in education for 20 years. And so, I think that's the piece. And, I talked a little earlier about that incremental leadership, but I never really saw myself in this role. Um, and it took some encouragement for me to really start this process. And I'm so grateful that I did, because this is my favorite job I've ever had in education. I mean, I love it. I've not had a day where I go home and I don't really feel effective. And I haven't had a day yet where I go home and I'm like, wow, you know? So, but that kind of just goes back then to, why am I feeling like that? Why am I feeling effective? And it's just this process that I'm engaging in.
Yeah. Well, as someone who knew you before you were a school leader, I always thought that you would be a
You're
great
just
leader.
making that up.
Oh, no, no,
No.
no. I mean, I'm pretty sure that we had talked about that at
Yeah.
some point, and, knowing, just how effective of a special education teacher that you were, I think that it's really fun to see you in this role and to hear more about your day-to-day, and I always like to celebrate school leaders that are doing the hard work to really make a difference in their school, because I always say we need great leaders and we need to support them. So, if no one said to you today, thank you for all the hard work that you're doing for your school and your community, and just yeah, thanks for being willing to talk with me, even though maybe you were feel obligated.
No, I didn't feel obligated. I'm gonna say you're making me blush. But no, I just really appreciate this time too.
Yeah.
I always love just being able to kind of talk about what I'm doing, because honestly, like it helps me reflect, right? Because as we're talking, I'm reflecting on what I'm doing, and it's like, okay, well, maybe there's something I can do a little differently to be more effective. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I'm excited to share, and we'll share in the show notes links to the SAM process website and just more about information about what that looks like for time tracking and all that kind of stuff. I geeked out a little bit when you showed me the time portal. I was
It's
like, maybe I should
amazing.
start doing. I was like, maybe I
Yeah.
should start time tracking. I think I should probably start time tracking for my
So it's
job too.
funny, like my wife your sister has said several times, maybe we should time track your weekend. It's like, because, like sometimes it's like, well, I have this, and this to do. And then it's Sunday evening and I'm like, I still have this, and to do. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, she's been like, we could do that and set up your personal time and, your time where you're not really engaged in much. And then we could, get your management and your instructional both for things in the house and with the kids. And I'm kind of like, ooh, I kind of like that idea on one hand, but on the other hand,
You need some parts of
yeah,
your life that
just a little bit of unstructured time is
aren't, like,
not a bad
managed
thing.
down to the minute. I
Yeah.
do feel like that. I think that that's the danger of doing it too much, but well, thank you so much for your time today, and, I hope you have a great day.
Thanks. You too. I really have enjoyed this. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Schoolin' Around, a podcast hosted by Branching Minds. Go ahead and subscribe to our feed wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget, if you are enjoying our content, would you do us a favor and rate and review our podcast on iTunes? This helps others find our podcast and lets us know how much you love what we're creating. Branching Minds is an educational technology company using learning sciences and technology to help districts effectively personalize learning through MTSS. To learn more about us, check out our website, branchingminds.com, or follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or LinkedIn at Branching Minds.